Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm Shalice Spike, and this is my friend Lyneia King. We are here. I'm going to be interviewing Lyneia. Lyneia came and did a fireside for our ward just last week. We had planned on recording the fireside, but we had some technical difficulties. And so we just decided to do an interview so that we could go a little bit more in depth with Lyneia. I'm just going to share a little bit about how I know Lyneia. So Lyneia, I consider to be extended family. She's my brother-in-law's sister-in-law's sister. So we're totally related, right? She's my sister. She's my sister in Christ. So I just want to also say that Lyneia, I met Lyneia 2 years ago. She came down to spend Thanksgiving with her sister and mom, and they came over to our house for Thanksgiving. And so I met Lyneia, chatted with her a little bit, but we didn't really get to know each other there, did we, Lyneia? Like, I mean, we chatted a little bit, but there was just something about you. Like, there was something about you that you just had this light coming from you. And I could tell that you had some experiences that I didn't know. There was just something about you. And then I was at a holiday gathering this December, and your mom was there. So I sat down with your mom and was just chatting with her, and I asked how you were. And she started to share some of your story with me. And I mean, we probably chatted for like half an hour. I was just like enthralled by the things that she was sharing with me. And I said, that's what it was. That's why Lyneia has this light coming from her. I just had no idea. And so I said, that story just has to be heard. And as I've been kind of thinking about what might help move our Relief Society sisters closer to Christ, the Spirit was like, you need to have Lyneia come and do a fireside. Like, all right, I will. It's like, no, like now, you need to do this soon. So we set it up, and Lyneia came down and did a beautiful fireside, and I'm just really excited to go a little bit more in depth with you and just ask you more questions about your experience so that we can share it with not only the sisters that didn't get to go to the fireside, but also with the sisters that did get to go to the fireside, so that they can just have another, like, an hour is just not long enough to hear your story. So, and I know we're not going to hear it all today, but we'll do what we can. So let's go ahead and get started. So my first question for you, Lyneia, is I'd love to hear a little bit about like your childhood, where you grew up, what kind of home environment you lived in. Give me just kind of a picture of your growing up time.
Okay. So I was born in Montana, and I was born in a little town called Libby, and it's like it's very small, there's not too much going on and everything. And I stayed there until I was about 10 years old. So I grew up in Montana, but I just like kind of bounced around from small town to small town in Montana. And, there wasn't too much to keep you busy as a kid, like especially when I moved to this other town, Knoxon. Things were good in Libby when I was growing up. I remember having a good childhood. I remember like there was struggles in my family and everything with like my brothers and stuff, but that all in all, I just remember having a good childhood when I was in Libby. When I moved out of Libby and I went to another school in Knoxon, I just remember having a little bit more struggles. It was like when I was turning into a teenager, and like I started to have a lot of issues with depression and anxiety, and like I started to have these panic attacks that were really bad, and like I would get hives from how much anxiety that I would have. Like I would miss weeks of school sometimes at a time. Like I struggled in school socially. I just had that's when I started running into a lot of issues, is when I moved to Knoxon, and I wasn't as connected with like the ward that I was going to. I struggled in the ward that I was going to. I just didn't feel like there was many people that I could connect with. And the people that I did like know in the ward, like family and stuff like that, not immediate family, like, but just I felt like people, well, not people, I shouldn't say people. I just felt more condemned with certain people. And I didn't like, I started to develop a bad taste for going to church, you know?
But just kind of
So,
felt judged as you were going there.
mhm,
Like
yeah. And then
tell me a little bit about that. Like what were you feeling judged about?
I was just feeling like I don't want to go too much into detail about like who, what, you know,
Oh no, no,
but just, I
absolutely.
just felt it was family. Like it was not immediate family, but it was family. And I just felt like it was hard because they were like always like pointing out what I was doing wrong, you
Mhm.
know,
Right.
and I struggled anyway. And I don't think that they meant any harm. I think that they were doing the best that they knew how to do. I think that they thought they were doing the right thing and everything. I took it wrong when I was a teenager, and it was just I didn't really like living the standards anyway. So I took it as another reason, as like, this is why I'm not going, you know.
Yeah.
So like if I actually felt like I had a reason to be there, I think that it would be easier to just be like and brush it off. But I didn't have that. I didn't have anything that connected me to like a testimony, and nor was felt like I was strong enough at the time, because I started relying at a very young age on vices and crutches instead of learning how to turn to Christ. You know, I was very, my way that I viewed the gospel was very skewed. So
So it was more you were going because it was kind of like that's what you do. Our family goes to church. You know, I kind of I can definitely relate to that because it was like that for me for quite some time as well. So as far
yeah.
as those kind of uncomfortable feelings or feeling judged and feeling like, you know, maybe you didn't have quite as good of a relationship with the people in your church as you did in your other town, you were saying it was, you know, just different.
Yeah.
um, and you're talking about vices, like what 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 you talked a little bit in your fireside about vices.
Uh-huh.
Let's talk a little bit about that. Like what are some of the vices that really kind of took you in when you were a youth, when you were a teenager, that really just kind of grabbed a hold of you?
I would say that like the things that like is the very core, I feel like, to where I started to turn to like addictions and everything, is just like compulsively doing things. Like if I liked a song, I would listen to it over and over. There's something that would, I know that's like kind of strange, but like more things like turning to food. Like food was a huge vice for me. Media, watching TV. Um, and like that's what I did, you know, like avoiding uncomfortable situations instead of dealing with them. Um, and just protecting myself in my own little comfort zone, you know. I'm trying to think of other vices, like uh yeah, just at a really young age I started turning to things for like acceptance from people. I feel like that one was a huge, like the between the food and that, and trying to seek validation from people that didn't validate me. As a matter of fact, it like made me feel like worse about myself, right? I that's where I really started to develop a poor image about myself. Is I wasn't seeking my validation from Christ. I wasn't seeking my validation from when my parents thought of me, because they're my parents, right? And so I was more seeking validation from people that probably never would have validated me at that time in my life. And it just got me into this hole of like, I started to develop really negative self-image, and my anxiety started to get really bad. And all these different things came with the not being able to deal with the emotions that came from that. And then, you know, just like there was other struggles going on within my family. Like my brothers, they dealt with problems when they were growing up as well. There was abuse in the family, and my older brothers, they ended up getting into drugs and alcohol. Specifically, one of my brothers, you know, really struggled. But my other brother had vices that he turned to as well. And so it was something that, like, you know, I always looked up to my older family members. And so it was something that, like, you know, it wasn't so, you know, it wasn't such a I wasn't so distanced from it. So
like you were seeing kind of maybe some of these behaviors going on with your brothers and being in that kind of environment too. I see, knowing a little bit about addiction, there's basically, from what I understand and in my experience, there's like this hole that you're trying to fill, right? That it's like I'm gonna try to listen to this music, or I'm gonna eat this food or whatever, to just feel okay, to feel good, right? Yeah. So that was kind of your experience as far as, using those things essentially to feel okay.
just escape. Yeah.
To escape. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So, and in your experience, because I understand that you had this long period of, started kind of with these vices, these different addictions, and then it kind of got crazy and out of control. Can you tell me a little bit about where it shifted to, like, okay, I'm kind of using this food, I'm using music or whatever, and then kind of going into other things, to whatever you feel like you want to share about how that progressed for you.
Okay. Yeah, no, definitely. I think that's a really important piece, actually. The more I've studied about addiction, it's like there's three different things that affect like how they consider it a disease. Like it's been classified as a disease, but they say that because it's progressive and it's terminal. Like eventually, if you keep progressing in it, then you will die from it. So it's in your genes, like it can be passed down through your genes, but your environment and like the underlying things that cause you to want to self-medicate that you develop has a big factor to do with that too. Like, is there social anxiety? Is there things that are underlying reasons as to when you take the substance, does it make it more magnetic than if you didn't have those, And so I feel like I did have a lot of those things. Like I pretty much was a magnet for all the things that were hard, like in the family, like social anxiety, all those different like kinds of things that played into like, okay, this is why like I feel okay when I do this, and so like, and then the environment that you're in. And so although I like didn't have like, my parents didn't smoke and drink, my dad was a recovering alcoholic, but and my mom was always like a really good example for me and everything, but I did have some of that influence around me. And I'm not like it got to the point where when I became a teenager and I started to like just hang around different kinds of people. And my brother at the time, he was struggling with things that he was going through. And he came back from Iraq because he went overseas for a while, and he developed he had a lot of addiction issues himself, everything like, so I guess like when I became a teenager, I kind of just started feeling like maybe I would be more accepted if I was losing weight. Maybe I would be more accepted if I was doing these things that like look like fun and stuff, like, and it just became something that grabbed me really quick. It was something that I felt like it was hard to continue to go to the school that I was going to. And so I decided to move out. My mom struggled with that one, but she knew that I really struggled. And so I decided to move in with one of my brothers. And I went to a different high school, and not it being like as monitored as much. I started to smoke. I started to experiment with alcohol. I started to experiment with other things like weed, and like anything that I had access to, anything that was around me that I had access to, I would start to experiment with. And it was just something that like immediately when I did it, it was like, it felt like it was like, how could I let go of this,
Interesting. Kind of felt,
Yeah.
it felt good. Like it felt, you're like, yeah. Tell me like kind of the feelings that you got from trying things.
Just relief. Just I felt like I was accepted around the people that I was hanging around that did those things, and just relief. Like I didn't feel like I had to deal with all these underlying issues that
So that
that
like the
made me,
anxiety kind of like lightened up, the um just the fears or the worries about other people kind of just let go a little bit when you were
yeah,
using that. Interesting. Okay. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And like, it just, it was, it was something that gave me something to look forward to. At that time in my life, I didn't feel like I had much to look forward to. I didn't know when, like, and so I felt like it was immediately something that I had that nobody could take away. Well, I mean, they could, but not, you know, um, but it was just something that made me feel okay. Like it made
Yeah.
me feel okay in my own skin.
Yeah,
So
actually, something that pops into my mind, some of my friends who are recovering alcoholics, they often refer to alcohol as liquid courage. Like they drink it and it'd be like everything, all the inhibition kind of goes away. And then you know, you're not afraid or whatever. But
yeah.
how did you feel as far as like, I know that with these drugs or alcohol or food, even, or any of those things, there, like we were talking about before, there's a progression. So like
Yeah.
you know, a little bit will make you feel that way, but then you build a tolerance to that, and then you start, you know, you need to have a little bit more and more. Can you tell me a little
Mhm.
bit about like progression and um how that, what that looked like for you?
Yeah. So I was actually going to address that and then somehow I got lost in something else. But so I feel
Perfect.
like for me, it started with food, but like anything that trains your brain to that you turn to as a vice that releases those chemicals that somehow links it to dealing with your emotions. That is the start to addictions. And then if you cross addicting to something that releases a lot more of those chemicals in your brain, then you've already progressed in addiction, but now you've just touched something that's just completely made you progress even more. And so addiction is not just like, what drug do you take? It's a matter of, can you stop? Like, is this tied to your emotions? Is this tied to your development? Like, and for me, I honestly felt like it was tied to so much. Like with the eating disorder, I started doing that at the same time as I started like trying substances and stuff. And another one that was really easy for me to get into because it was such a huge like epidemic at the time is that you could pretty much go to any doctor. My dad was on a bunch of narcotics, like it was all around me, and I pretty much had access to narcotics like whenever. And it was just like, that is one thing that really, when I, like, not just the alcohol, but that's something that became like a real, it started to kind of turn more towards, I can get this from my doctors.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like that with between the eating disorder, I started to develop bulimia really bad because then I discovered that I could pretty much eat whatever I wanted and then not gain weight. And that is something that grabbed me really quickly because I didn't know how to stop doing that. I remember sitting down on this bench when I was 16 and just kind of overlooking this area of where I was at. And I just remember like saying this prayer in my heart of just like, I hope, like, how do I get out of this? Like, because I just felt like I couldn't get out of it. Like, it was just something that food started to feel like a foreign substance in my body. And the dysmorphia that I had of like what I looked like was really bad. And I feel like the drugs fueled like me not having to address that. It's like I could just have an empty stomach and take a couple pills and wash it down with alcohol and everything would be fine. And that would happen at a very young age. Like when you're supposed to be developing socially, emotionally, you're supposed to be taking the things in life that come at you and developing that part of your brain. And that teaches you how to develop with your emotions and situations and socially and everything. I feel like I never really had much as of a chance during that period of my life, which is a very important period, because I had so many vices that I turned to that kept me from developing in that way, you
Mm-hmm.
know.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah. So, and I know one of the things that you shared a little bit about in the fireside was you left home and somehow you cross country hitchhiking, something like that. Can you share some share some of the experience that you feel comfortable with, like that, where these vices or things or this feeling of, you know, just where did this take you?
is so it, like now that I spiritually look back on things, I see the importance of the Holy Ghost. Like the Holy Ghost is an actual spirit, like an actual gift that helps you with so many things. Like it comforts you, it brings you peace, it gives you knowledge in the perfect areas of your life, which helps your development. Like your spirit needs to be joined with your mind, and you like the holistic version. That's why a lot of treatment centers are like really centered around holistics, is because the spiritual part is the very core to our development. And the gift of the Holy Ghost, I look back on that. And if I would have actually clung to the Lord, then I did have the gift of the Holy Ghost and the gift of the Spirit to be able to help me during that time to transition and progress and deal with things. But I cut myself off because of the vices that I turned to, the substances, and like Satan just knew what to throw at me that would just completely derail me. And so there was a lot of crazy experiences that, like that hitchhiking one was just one of the many crazy
Feel,
crazy experiences. That was
feel free
actually
to share like
before.
anything
Okay.
you feel comfortable sharing, because I think sharing experience is so powerful as far as just a connection, like, people being able to relate or just seeing where these things can take us. Like I think there's such power in just sharing. So whatever you feel comfortable sharing with, crazy story, not crazy story, like anything that you feel inspired to
Okay.
share would be awesome.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. So I did actually end up moving back in with my parents because things didn't really work out. And I went to homeschooling instead of going back to school. And that just made it easier for me to just kind of go wherever I wanted to go. And at that point, like my parents didn't know how to deal with what I was dealing with. They did the best that they could. My mom, she was always really strong in her faith. And if it wouldn't have been for my mom's example and all of her prayers, I definitely wouldn't be where I'm at right now. Cause she developed, or like, she really, really just seen that, there's only so much you can do to control the situation. And then you just kind of have to let the rest over to God. So I feel like that was part of her journey of like learning to just trust God. But, we moved quite a few times. So we ended up moving to Thompson Falls, another town in Montana. We were in this little apartment for a while. I started to really branch out and hang out with people and go and party and just like Montana kids, I guess that's what a lot of us do in the small towns, is when there's nothing to do, then, and I'm not speaking for everybody, but there's just, yeah, just
Yeah.
let's go in the woods and get drunk and so I was doing a lot of that. I was just kind of coming and going, and I smoked cigarettes, and I just was kind of just continuing the same behaviors. And like my dad had kidney failure when I was about 16, and that was I was out when that happened, and I was kind of stranded at this house in the woods, and I had to like walk to somebody else's house to be able to call for a ride because we were stranded out there. I think we got in some kind of minor car accident the day before. And then I walked over there, and the lady that's house that I walked to ended up giving me a ride, which was super nice of her. And I found out when I got to the house that my dad had kidney failure, and I was like super sad about that I wasn't even there when my dad had kidney failure, and he ended up being okay and everything. But just different experiences like that. And by the time I was about 17, the pills were something that I really was just like, I don't know, the pills were something that really was like one of my drugs of choice. They were easy access. Uh, you know, and then between that and the alcohol, there had been so many times. Because like the two things that you're not supposed to mix together were like my drug of choice. So like downers, like benzodiazepines, opiates, and alcohol, I would mix all of them together, and I would usually end up in the hospital like numerous amount of times. I would end up in the hospital, or I would end up in the hospital with low potassium because of purging so much with my eating disorder. And like pretty much my diet just consisted of whatever I could get my hands on to give me energy and to make me feel better. So I didn't have to look at myself and like what I was doing with my life, because I felt trapped. I felt like, okay, I know what I'm doing. This is like scary, but I can't face what I'm doing because I don't know how to stop what I'm doing. And so I would just grab on to like whatever made me feel better. And usually it would just land me in the hospital. And that's when I started getting in trouble with the law. Like I would get arrested for minors in possession of alcohol because I was still underage. And I was in and out of jail and hospitals a lot and went in and out of treatment centers. Like by the time I was 19, I remember being through two treatment centers already, two inpatient treatment centers. And although they taught me skills and everything, I still wasn't ready to like overcome the addictions. Like they were just planting seeds, you know, like, and then by the time I was 21, I remember that like I spent my 20th and my 21st birthday in jail, like just being in and out of jail so many times. I think that the judge there was like trying to protect me. I never picked up like any serious charges or anything like that. But I honestly think that the judge was just like, wow, like this kid's got some problems. Like I need to keep her kind of under my wing, because he ended up like writing off everything, right? Like, and so you know, he did it for my own protection. Like he would put me in there and just, okay, you have to get treatment. This didn't work. Let's try this and everything. And so by the time I was 21, I remember I had been to another treatment center again, and I tried another that they recommended that I go to this like sober living place. And I ended up getting in kind of with the wrong, hanging out with people that just struggled with the same things that I did. And yeah, that's like that's where it really started to go downhill too, is like the alcoholism really started to progress. Like I was drinking all the time after I left that place. And the court didn't really have jurisdiction or anything anymore. And so I just kind of like went and did my own thing. Like, you know, so that was kind of a pause of like, you know, I was hanging out with some people, and I remember the house that I was staying at the time, there was somebody that got stabbed on the couch. They didn't die or anything like that, but somebody broke into the house and like stabbed this person. And I was so out of it that when the police officers tried to wake me up to see if I was a witness or anything, they couldn't wake me up until I woke up, and my roommate is like the police tried to wake you up last night, like. And then she told me what happened, and I was just like my life, like I'm gonna, you know, I don't know, yeah, why I'm still alive, but that was all by the time I was still 21. And so there was a lot more ahead of that it would even get worse than that. Like there's a lot of scary experiences that I had with just like mixing different drugs. I would just experiment with different drugs. Like if it was around and people were doing it, then I wasn't picky about things at that point. Like I kind of just let my guard down a lot, where I was just experimenting at that point. Like I just kind of had like this fear that I didn't want to die, like this really, really intense fear that I didn't want to die, but yet it was a fear, right? And so how do you control your emotions that you don't want to deal with at the time? Like I would just numb them. Like I would just grab the very thing that was killing me to numb the fact that I was not dying. Like, you know, and you know, this portion of my life is very critical because it helped me turn my heart back towards God. It helped me turn my heart. Like when I was in jail, like I remember I would ask for a Book of Mormon, and I would receive witnesses, like small ones. I would receive like different, like comfort that God was there and that he was aware of me and everything. And that's the only thing that would help me get through those situations, you know. And just being in other scary situations, there, like I would know that God had protected me in so many different situations. Yeah, like I have a lot of different stories that I could tell, but like, is there anything specific? Like,
well, the question comes like I'm thinking about conversation that I had with your mom, and then also conversations that I've had with your sister, where they didn't, you know, you had hitchhiked across the country and they didn't know exactly where you were, but your sister somehow would be able to find you and like kind of track you all along the way, even though you were just kind of going,
Floating.
there's like, and I know for them, because, this addiction affects so many people, there's this ripple effect. And so just thinking about all the, your parents that were affected, and your sister, and how they really had to, like you say, really trust in the Lord, and let you go and do, because they couldn't fix it, they couldn't change it, with when you're working with somebody with alcoholism or any sort of addiction or anything, really, like we're powerless over. That's really the true problem, is like, I'm powerless over you, I'm powerless over me, I'm powerless over this addiction. But for you, like, how I would love to hear anything you want to share about that experience of, going cross country, and then also kind of what was your rock bottom that hit, because you had been in and out of treatment, and you'd think, treatment, you go into treatment and then you go out and you're good, is like, no, that's not, like, addiction is like a crazy thing to break. Like, it's a hard thing to, it's like a vice grip, there's anyway. So I would love to hear just anything you want to share about that, your rock bottom, kind of how you got to, what was it that actually brought you, though you had those experiences along the way, those little experiences with the Holy Ghost along the way, witnessing that God was there and watching and protecting you. What was it that brought you to your knees for, that change, that real deep change? I don't know if that's too much of a question or too vague, but
No, that makes sense. Like, it kind of gives me a direction in which I can kind of take it. Like, so I had all these different experiences, but like, it led to the point, like, where before I came to Utah, I was just kind of completely broken. Like, I was on this medication that they give you for opiate withdrawal. And I remember I left the relationship that I was in, and I just had my son Shane. And during the pregnancy, I didn't drink or anything like that. Like, I just had him though, and I went to Utah to just kind of get out of the marriage that I was in. And my son at the time, because I was just really struggling, I couldn't, like, my brother was taking care of him. And so just not knowing how to deal with things, I while that was happening, and while things were being settled with that, I went back up to Montana, and I tried to work things out again, but it was obvious that it was not supposed to work out, and that I was supposed to just, like, I felt like I just needed to leave. Like, there's some crazy situations that happened, but I ended up getting dropped off at this truck stop. And I remember just going and asking anybody, like all the truck drivers that were there. I just went up and I was like talking to them, and I was like, can you, like, where are you headed? Like, can you give me a ride and everything? And there was this one in particular truck driver that says, well, I'm not headed to Utah, I'm headed to Minnesota. But if you want to ride, you can have a ride. And I was like, okay, great. And so I just hopped in this truck, and I was just not, I was drinking along the way and everything. And I just felt so sick, because I stopped abruptly taking the medication that I was on. And I started, like, severely detoxing off of that. And I was like so sick. And so drinking was like the only way that I could kind of deal with that at the time. And so good thing, like, he wasn't completely scary or anything, because, like, he
you're
gave,
getting into a truck with, right?
yeah, like, I just kind of had this mentality that, like, I'm not dead yet, so obviously God must be protecting me, and if I was gonna die, I'm dead right now. So so yeah, I got into this random truck and went with this guy to Minnesota, and he was actually headed to Pennsylvania or something like that, one of the or East Coast states. And I was like, okay, just drop me off here before you go all the way to the East Coast. And so I was all the way in, like, Minnesota, and I ended up, like, getting at this truck stop, and I met up with these people, and they were just, like, the nicest people. They were the nicest people. I still keep in touch with them to this day. And they knew I was in a hard spot. And I just kind of probably looked like one of those, like my sister kind of described it one time, and it's kind of sad, but like if you see like a stray dog or something like that, or a stray cat, like I probably look like that just sitting there, you know. And I remember they were like, it was like a Vikings game or something like that, and like they were big huge Vikings fans, and like I'm not a football fan or anything, but I hung out with them that night, and they bought me drinks and everything, and I kind of told them about my situation. And they were so nice enough that like they ended up buying me this bus ticket, and I went to Utah. And so like I was headed back to Utah, and my sister all this time is like trying to keep tabs on where I'm at. Like first there's a truck driver, and like this truck driver that talked to her said like, I don't know if you know your sister is like hitchhiking, but some truck drivers aren't as nice as I am. Like, you know, and so she was just like, you know, like not even knowing what to think. And then she gets a call from these people like, yeah, your sister's here and everything. And so she is keeping tabs on me all over the place. And I remember like I jumped off the bus a couple different times because I was so sick, and like I was like drinking, and they kicked me off once for drinking. And this like creepy guy followed me off the bus, and I ended up actually staying at like these two guys got into a fight, and so one of them takes me over to these people's house in South Dakota that were really nice. Like they were super nice. I was still detoxing at the time. They were like the old grandparent type, and like they just, you're the kind of people that are like definitely the salt of the earth, because like they must have seen how like vulnerable, and so they helped me out. Like I stayed at their house, they had their grandkids there and everything, and they were super sweet. And so I get back on the bus when I get feeling a little bit better, and I end up jumping back off again in Wyoming. I end up that time I woke up in a hospital. Like I was just attached to all these IVs. I woke up in a hospital. I remember just being like not even knowing what's going on, and they released me from the hospital, but I had like this reaction to this medication they gave me, and I thought I was going to have a seizure or something. But anyway, long story short, I finally arrived back in Utah, and I can see now how like everything lined up perfectly to how like the missionaries that arrived there that I'm still really good friends with this day. They live in Provo, and they showed up and they were able to help me get into a hotel. And my sister came down and she met me there, and like I was just trying to make things work here in Utah because my son was here, and I was trying to get working, and I was trying to do these things, but I was still coming off of stuff to where it was so hard for me to stay sober. Like I would always end up just drinking or just getting in with the wrong crowd again. Like I had a couple of really scary experiences when I was here in Utah. And those should have woke me up, like just being in a situation around these people that yeah, that just a really scary situation. But that's when like it led to my sister got this random call one day, and she's like, there's this treatment center in Hawaii that wants to that wants to take your sister and everything. So, you know, and this is like the worst part. Like this is the winding up scene. Like throughout the years, like I had never really gotten over my eating disorder, but I had managed with other medications. Like I'd always get a medication from my doctor or something. I was a functioning, not so functioning addict kind of thing, right? And so yeah, this is where it just kind of led up to going to Hawaii. And I felt strength me on my own because I didn't want to go. Like I knew that like I was just going to be leaving everything behind. Not that they're like my son, like that was the biggest thing. I was like so concerned I wouldn't get to see my son for 2 years and everything, like because it was a 2-year commitment treatment center. And I was just like, I don't want to go, like, you know, and they're like, you know, my family's all trying to convince me, like, you need to go.
You need to do this. Yes.
Yeah, you need to do this. And so I did. And that was like the start of like the first part of like just needing to completely rely on the Lord, you know.
What
Yeah.
what do you feel like, because you mentioned that kind of all along the way through your entire experience, and we're talking 15-year period here, right? That you had little bits and pieces, like when you were in jail and you had a Book of Mormon and you had some experiences. Can you share some of the spiritual experiences that were kind of, that helped to get you to your spiritual awakening that finally kind of turned, where you turned a corner, and share any of that progression? That, because addiction is progressive, but I also believe that like spirit is progressive as well. Like recovery,
That is,
recovery is definitely progressive as well.
yeah. Well, now that I look back, it's so crazy the things you can't see when you're going through that. Like you feel like, even though I was like at my absolute bottom of like, people probably thought it was like hopeless and everything. Like I can see how the Lord really developed a lot of strength, and he helped me have a strong will by how strong-willed I was in clinging onto things that were not good for me. He helped me to be strong, and to have to be strong in certain situations, and to have to rely on faith. Even though I wasn't acting in accordance with my faith, I still had a faith that he was there, and I still had to rely on that in very difficult circumstances. So all these things that he was building in me, like that chapter, like that scripture that Paul talks about, to where our strengths are perfected through our weakness. And that's like really was a new insight for me, is that like it wasn't wasted time, because the Lord was helping me gain experience that I needed. He was helping me gain strength, grit, like all these things that would help me when I was actually converted, that would work for me, were being formed when the things seemed like to be working against me, And so like little experiences, like when I would go to jail, I didn't have that comfort, like that hole was open again. Or like when I go to treatment centers, that hole is opened, because like I was forced to not have any vices. Like they would give you the food that you would eat. They would, like you're around other people that had all these feelings of anxiety and stuff too. So you had to like, it has a real way of bringing out your spiritual roots to find comfort, because that was the only comfort that I found in there. Like sometimes it would be so bad to where it was like the scriptures were the only thing that brought me hope and peace. And like my prayers would be answered sometimes through this, like I would ask questions and some things would come. And so like, it wasn't like that explosion of the light that came. It was just little bits of light that are like, okay, you need to continue to keep turning to this kind of thing. Yeah. So
that's really powerful. Like, I love what you said just about how when you were in those treatment centers and those drugs or things weren't available to you, or it was like a very controlled environment, that like that actually made space for the spirit to be able to come in and like talk to you. It's like, okay, all right, we have a little opening here. Like,
yeah.
So when you went to Hawaii, because as I understand it, that was where your real turning point was. Can you tell us kind of about, you kind of talked about rock bottom and those really scary situations that you faced in Utah, and then like what was your experience like when you went to Hawaii, and how did it progress to that real strong, powerful turnaround for you?
So everything that the Lord had been planting in me, at this point, I had been going back to church. At this point, like throughout my addictions, I did go to church. I did try to go to some of the activities, like even with like when I was still married and stuff, we would go to church. And although I still had the vices that I did, I would still go to church, because every time I went to church, I would always hear what I needed to hear, and I noticed that. Like that did bring that sense of peace back in my life, like my spiritual roots of just like having that comfort. So I did have these little pieces along the way that turned my heart back towards the Lord. But when I went to Hawaii, I went to this treatment center, and it was just like hard to really wrap my mind around, because although I can see why they did the things they did, like a lot of it, I was just like, why are they wearing nylons on their head? Like, and standing bolt or being punished all day or something, like, and it was like the accountability piece of it. But I'm just like, I can't do this for 2 years. Like, and then like, I wrestled with it. But then after like a week, I was like, I'm not ready. Like and then I just made this really impulsive decision, like story of my life at that time. I was so impulsive. Like I just made this decision that I needed to leave. But I remember they wanted me to call my sister before I did. And it was so heartbreaking because like my family worked so hard to get me over there. And I could just like hear the disappointment in my sister, like, Lyneia, like, please don't leave. Like, and I was just like, I'm sorry, like, I'm sorry. And it was so sad, but I remember I ended up on the streets of Oahu and I met up with this girl that like took me back to this house, and she did drugs and stuff, but we made something to eat, and she at the time was trying to take advantage of me because apparently there's a lot of people that leave the treatment center and they end up like, a lot of people call this like the last chance place or something like that. And there's like there's so many homeless people on the streets of Oahu that it's insane. Like a lot of people that I don't know, for whatever reason, they come there and they just end up on the streets. And yeah, so I ended up leaving that situation and I met this other person, and I ended up just hanging with him because I felt like at least he was protecting me, even though it was like not the best situation to be in. He was kind of abusive and everything. But I felt like, like I don't know what to do right now because I was still clung to my addictions and he was addicted to things. And so we kind of just fed each other's habit. And he was going through some hard things in his life too. So I did see a lot of how the Lord worked in both of our lives through that situation. And yeah, like I remember at one point I got off the alcohol, and usually when I would get off the alcohol, I would get doing better because the alcohol was one thing that made my addictions hard to control, because I would get so like I would start binge drinking and it's like I couldn't help it. Like I would just black out. And so I was still taking like prescriptions when I was over there, but I wasn't on something that completely blacked me out and stuff. He kind of really discouraged that, like, you don't need to be doing that and stuff, So I remember we lived a lot in his truck, and we just kind of made it how we needed to and stuff. And at one point in time, we got into this house, but it didn't work out, and we ended up back in the vehicle. But in the meantime, I flew back to Montana. Like I flew back to Montana. I got to visit I got to spend time with my parents. And then I knew, like, I had this situation happen to where it was almost like it was working against me going back to Hawaii, but like he was working really hard at getting me to go back to Hawaii. So, and it ended up working out. And even though I was still living in a truck, like a vehicle and stuff. But I felt different that time. I felt more hopeful. Like I felt like things were starting to shift. And that is when, like, it just felt like everything and everyone around me, like it was just like the Lord started to slowly lift the veil for a minute and just allowing to feel and see all of the spiritual darkness that I was surrounded in, and like just beyond what I could actually see. Like it clicked of how it just connected, like, and it wasn't just by fear. It was like the Lord completely opened my eyes. Like it was like a light switch turning on, but he knew I was strong enough at that point, and my heart was in the right place at that point to come back to him. Because when he did that, I had like I could go on about these spiritual experiences that I had and how he guided me. It was like when, how President Nelson talks about when the Spirit comes, like it makes what what shouldn't be attractive less appealing and everything. Like it takes the enticement out of things that are contrary to the will of God. It was like that, like magnified. Like everything that I needed to let go of had Satan's fingerprints all over it. Like it was just like I knew exactly what I needed to do. But it wasn't just that. I remember having an experience where I actually looked in a mirror and I just felt all this darkness around me. I felt like it was just around everything and everyone. And I just remember having this experience of like looking in the mirror and actually physically seeing a light, like light in my eyes again. Like after just my eyes being so darkened for so long, like it was like a physical thing where I seen the like light in my eyes again. And that contrast of like not having the spirit there and then having the spirit there and like the inspiration that came from it, like I knew God was real at that time. Like I went from only believing that he was real to knowing that he was real, because I like seen things with my spiritual eyes and everything. And at that point it gave me the desire to let go of everything. Smoking, like, I had tried to let go of things before, but my eating disorder and the smoking always pulled me back down into it, because it prevented me from grasping the gift of the Holy Ghost. That is where our strength comes from. That is where our knowledge comes from. That's where the desire to keep moving comes from. And anything that weakens the spirit is what Satan will try to do, even if it seems so simple. Like from the music I watched to the movies I would watch to the people that I hung around. Like it was like I knew everything I needed to let go of, but my joy was so great at that time. It was like it completely filled that gnawing, never being able to get satisfied feeling of just like brim with joy. And it was like I was able to just completely just let go of everything that I needed to and completely just grasp everything that I needed to. Like I knew what I needed to do all along, you know?
Yeah.
So
here's what I'd like to do, because what you've shared so far is like so hugely important, just like the progression and how it worked for you and how the addiction kind of just wouldn't let go. And I feel like I want to do a part 2. How do you feel about doing
okay,
part 2?
I
Where,
think that would be a good idea.
because
Yeah.
I would love to hear again that how that light came in, how the light came on for you. Because addiction is it's such a prison, and it's so hard to break through. And I have so many more questions that I didn't like, that I want to ask, as far as like, how you were able to let go of those things. Because I know with addiction, it's not like you just stop, and you just never do it again. It's not, because people talk about overcoming addiction. It's like, no, you don't actually like never, like it's something that we're always going to have to be working on for basically the rest of our lives. This is, like you said, it's a disease, it's a progressive disease, and it's terminal. So, but what I would love to do is do a part 2 and focus on that spiritual change, that those things. I also want, like, and I'm thinking about, like, I know right now that you're serving as a service missionary in one of the jails that you were actually incarcerated in. So like, I want to hear the stories about how you're using your experience to be of service to other people and to bring hope to the hopeless. Because I know, like what you said, like all of the things that you went through up to this point, that they were meant to be too. Like they helped you to grow and learn and become closer to Christ. And like you say, that weakness, and that weakness is becoming strength in you. So I'm like, there's so much more that I want to know. So what I would love to do is set up a part 2. But let's go ahead and just close this one. Do you have anything else that you want to just take a couple minutes and just wrap this first session up with?
Yeah, I actually have a good thought that maybe would wrap this session up and be a good start for the next one.
Perfect.
Is that like the spirit and like receiving the spirit. You said that like it is a progression and a terminal thing, and like the spirit can satisfy where you're at the time. And then God, as like that's how I've seen my own healing process happen, is that's what I needed at the time, because I didn't have strength. He gave me his strength at the time because I didn't have it. But as we progress, we continue to gain more of that strength as we work that part of our brain and like allowing our emotions to be rounded with not just acting out of impulse and like healing from it. But he quickens that healing through the Holy Ghost, and he sustains you while he will guide you through experiences to continue to actually heal that part of your brain and like redirect to grasping on to things that bring you closer to him. He can be for your absolute benefit, and that will like make you magnetic towards him. So that's what this journey that I've been on since that experience has been like. And yeah, I'll go ahead and close with that. So
Love that. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and for being so vulnerable, because I know these are like super duper personal experiences, and you know, it's hard to share challenges and things that you've been through. But for me, I know it's your experience is worth its weight in gold. Like it's can help people see, you know, who are struggling with these same kinds of feelings of anxiety or depression, or like not feeling like they fit in or feeling judged, and maybe have a different experience and be able to learn from your experience. And I just am so grateful that you're willing to share it with us.
yeah, absolutely. I'm glad that I can.
Me too.
So
Okay, so we will do a part 2 coming up soon.
okay.